I didn't open the letter right away. It sat on my kitchen counter for most of the afternoon, angled just enough to catch the light whenever I passed by. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly thicker than the rest of my mail, my name written in a familiar, looping hand that made something in my chest soften before I even realized it had tightened. I made tea first, chamomile, the kind that smells like warm hay and quiet evenings. I wrapped my fingers around the mug and let the heat move slowly into my palms. Outside, the city hummed in its distant, polite way, cars far below, a neighbor's radio muffled through the walls. Everything felt ordinary, steady, almost too steady. The return address was from my grandmother's town by the coast, the one I hadn't visited in nearly 8 years. I finally opened the letter when the tea had cooled enough to sip without thinking. The paper inside was folded carefully, once, then again, as if whoever wrote it wanted to make sure it traveled safely. It wasn't long, just a few lines. Ella, I hope this reaches you gently. The house needs you, not urgently, just when you're ready. Love always, Aunt Margaret. That was all. I read it twice, then a third time, listening to my breath slow as I leaned against the counter. The words weren't alarming, they weren't dramatic, and yet they stirred something quiet and persistent, like a door left slightly open in my mind. The house. My grandmother's house sat at the edge of town, where the road curved inward toward the sea. I grew up there in pieces, summers mostly, barefoot and sun-warmed, with the sound of gulls stitched into my memories. After my grandmother passed, life moved on in that way it always does, gently but firmly. The house remained, though, waiting. I hadn't realized how much it still lived inside me until that letter arrived. That evening I packed slowly. I didn't rush, didn't make a list. I folded sweaters that still smelled faintly of laundry soap and tucked a scarf into my bag even though it was late spring. My movements felt unhurried, almost ceremonial, as if some part of me already knew this wasn't just a visit, it was a return. I slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep where the body seems to sigh on its own. The drive the next morning stretched out like a long exhale. The city thinned into suburbs, then fields, then roads edged with tall grasses that swayed lazily in the breeze. I rolled the window down and let the air brush against my skin, cool and salt-tinged the closer I got to the coast. By the time the ocean came into view, a soft, glimmering blue beneath a pale sky, my shoulders had dropped, my jaw unclenched. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding. The town sign looked exactly the same. The paint was a little more faded maybe, but the letters still curved kindly across the wood. I slowed as I passed it, as if acknowledging something old and familiar. Main Street was quiet, a bakery with fogged windows, the small bookstore still there, its door propped open. A few people moved about unhurriedly, as though time had learned to walk more slowly here. I parked near the house and sat for a moment before getting out. It stood just as I remembered, pale blue siding, white trim, and the wide porch that wrapped around like an embrace. The hydrangeas along the walkway were blooming, heavy with soft color. Someone had been tending to them. The key was still under the loose stone by the steps. I smiled at that. Inside, the house smelled of wood and clean air and something faintly floral. The floors creaked softly beneath my feet, a sound that felt less like noise and more like recognition. Sunlight filtered through the windows, dust.
I woke the next morning to the sound of the ocean breathing. Not loudly, just a low, steady rhythm drifting through the open window, rising and falling like it had all the time in the world. For a few moments, I stayed still beneath the weight of the quilt, letting that sound settle into me. My body felt heavy in the best way, as though sleep had gently pressed me back into myself. Sunlight rested on the far wall, pale and forgiving. The house seemed to be waking too, wood softly expanding, a faint creak somewhere above me. I noticed my breathing before I even thought about it, slow and even, and I let it stay that way. In the kitchen, I made coffee the way my grandmother used to. No rush, no measuring, just familiarity guiding my hands. I opened the back door and let the morning air wander in. It carried the smell of salt and damp earth and something sweet from the flowering bushes near the fence. I took my mug out onto the porch and sat in the old wicker chair that dipped slightly in the middle. It welcomed me without question. Across the street, Mrs. Holloway was already tending her garden, her straw hat tilted just enough to shade her eyes. She noticed me almost immediately. "Well," she called softly, as if not to startle the morning, "I was hoping it was you." I smiled before I stood, setting my mug down carefully. "Hi, Mrs. Holloway." She came closer, her movements unhurried, her smile warm in that way that makes you feel remembered. She looked mostly the same, silver hair pulled back neatly, gentle lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled. "You look just like your grandmother when she first wakes up," she said, nodding with satisfaction. "Peaceful." Something about that settled into me, easing a place I hadn't realized was tight. We talked for a while there on the porch about nothing urgent, the weather, the way the tides had been lately, who had moved away and who had quietly returned. She mentioned my aunt, how she'd been checking on the house regularly, keeping it aired out, making sure it didn't feel forgotten. "It's a house that notices things," Mrs. Holloway said, glancing toward the windows. "It doesn't like being alone too long." After she left, I wandered into town. Main Street welcomed me back without fuss. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly when I stepped inside, releasing a cloud of warm air and the smell of bread. I ordered something simple and sat by the window, watching people pass. A few recognized me, some didn't, at least not right away. There were smiles that grew slowly, names spoken gently, as if testing how they felt on the tongue after all this time. At the bookstore, I found Daniel. He was behind the counter, stacking a new delivery of paperbacks, his sleeves rolled up. He paused when he heard the door, just a fraction of a second, before his expression softened into something familiar and kind. "Ella," he said quietly, "you came back." I nodded. "For a little while." He didn't ask why. I appreciated that. We talked like old friends do when they don't need to fill every space with words, about his shop, about the quiet changes the town had made, about how time moves differently here, whether you want it to or not. Before he left, he slid a small book across the counter. He said, "This reminded me of you. No pressure, just something gentle." Back at the house that afternoon, I curled up on the couch with the book and let the hours drift by. The light shifted, the room warmed, then cooled again. I felt the texture of the fabric beneath my fingers, the way the pages whispered when I turned them. Eventually, my gaze returned to the small wooden box on the kitchen table. It didn't feel mysterious in a sharp way, more like patient curiosity, like something it trusted I'd come to it when the moment felt right. I rested my hand on the lid, but didn't open it, not yet. Outside, evening settled in quietly, and the house held me the way it always had, without questions, without urgency. And as the sky softened into deeper blues, I felt a growing sense of gratitude for the way this place let me arrive slowly, exactly as I was.
That night, I slept with the window open again. The air cooled gently as the hours passed, brushing against my skin like a familiar hand. I drifted in and out of dreams without effort, my thoughts loose and unguarded. Somewhere between waking and sleep, I felt the quiet certainty that nothing was being asked of me yet, only presence. Morning arrived softly. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, the floor cool beneath me, and paused when I saw the wooden box again. The light from the window rested on it now, warming its smooth surface. It felt less like an object and more like an invitation, one that had learned patience over time. I made breakfast first, toast and fruit, eaten slowly at the table where my grandmother used to sit, humming to herself as she read the paper. I let myself remember her hands, capable, steady, always warm. The memory didn't ache the way it once had. It felt settled, like a photograph tucked safely into an album. Only then did I lift the lid of the box. Inside were letters, not dozens, just enough to matter. Each was bundled with soft ribbon, colors slightly faded. There were photographs, too, their edges worn smooth, and a small brass key that caught the light when I shifted it. I didn't rush. I rested my elbows on the table and breathed. The letters were written in my grandmother's careful script, addressed to different members of the family, my aunt, my mother, even one with my name on it. That one I set aside, my chest warming at the sight of it. I opened another first. It spoke of ordinary things, days that passed quietly, moments of gratitude, small worries that resolved themselves over time. But woven through the words was something gentler and deeper, an awareness that family isn't always about proximity, but about the invisible threads that hold even when stretched. I read until my eyes felt heavy, then leaned back in the chair and closed them for a moment. The house was still, not silent, just comfortably alive. A faint tick from the old clock, the soft sound of wind moving through the trees outside. My breath found its rhythm again, slow and unforced. Later that morning, Aunt Margaret arrived. I heard her car before I saw her, the familiar engine sound pulling up along the gravel drive. She knocked once, lightly, as if she already knew I was there. She wrapped me in a hug that felt like home. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice warm and steady. We sat at the kitchen table together, the letters between us. She didn't explain right away. She didn't need to. We shared tea, letting the moment stretch comfortably. "She wanted you to find those when you were ready," she said, finally, her hand resting near the box. Not right after she passed, not when everything was still loud. I nodded. That felt right. "She believed the house remembered things for us," she continued, smiling faintly. "Held them until we could." We talked for hours, but nothing felt heavy. Stories surfaced, small misunderstandings smoothed out by time, truths revealed without urgency. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden shift, just clarity arriving gently, the way morning light fills a room. That afternoon, we walked through the house together. She pointed out small repairs she'd made, places she'd left untouched on purpose. In my grandmother's bedroom, the curtains stirred softly in the breeze, and I noticed how calm the room felt, complete somehow. Before she left, Aunt Margaret pressed the brass key into my palm. "She thought you'd know what to do with it," she said. I held it there long after she drove away, feeling its weight, its quiet certainty. As evening approached, I unlocked a small cabinet in the hallway I'd passed 100 times as a child. Inside were more photographs, neatly stacked, moments I'd forgotten, laughter caught mid-breath, gatherings that didn't make it into stories but lived on all the same. I sat on the floor and looked through them slowly, my back against the wall, the cool surface grounding me. My breathing stayed steady, my shoulders softened. This wasn't about uncovering secrets. It was about remembering that love doesn't disappear. It settles, it waits, it leaves gentle markers for us to find when we're ready to move more slowly. When night fell, I turned off the lights one by one, the house darkening without losing its warmth. I paused at the hallway, resting my hand against the wall. "Thank you," I whispered, to the house, to the people who had filled it, to the version of myself that had come back when it was time. In bed, with the sound of the ocean steady once more, I let that gratitude carry me into sleep, deep, untroubled, and full of quiet belonging. The days that followed didn't announce themselves. They arrived the way good mornings do, gently, without urgency, blending into one another until time felt less like a line and more like a soft circle. I stopped checking the clock. The house seemed to approve. Each morning, I woke to a slightly different quality of light. Some days it was silver and cool, other days warmer, almost honeyed. I noticed how my body responded, how I stretched longer beneath the blankets, how my breath found its depth before I even opened my eyes. The ocean remained constant, its steady presence smoothing the edges of thought. I fell into a rhythm that felt both new and deeply familiar. After breakfast, I would take a slow walk down to the shoreline. The path was worn from years of footsteps, mine included. I let my shoes dangle from my fingers and felt the sand beneath my feet, cool and firm near the water, softer farther up. Each step seemed to loosen something I hadn't known I was carrying. Sometimes Daniel joined me there. Not always at the same time, never planned. We'd spot each other from a distance, exchange a small wave, and fall into step together. We talked about books he loved, ones that stay with you long after finishing. I told him about the letters, about the way the house felt like a quiet participant in all of it. She always said some places remember us better than we remember ourselves, he said once, kicking at the sand lightly. That felt true. Other afternoons, I stayed in the house. I opened windows, wiped down shelves, moved through the rooms with an ease that surprised me. There was no sense of fixing or correcting, just tending. I noticed textures more than tasks. The grain of the wood beneath my palm, the faint warmth where sunlight rested, the sound of my own footsteps, unhurried. One afternoon, I found myself in the attic. I hadn't planned to go up there. I simply noticed the pull-down ladder and followed the thought without questioning it. The air up there was still, and smelled faintly of paper and cedar. Sunlight filtered through a small window, illuminating dust that floated lazily, unconcerned. There were boxes, neatly labeled. Holidays, old school things, letters already read. I smiled at that last one. In a box marked family, I found a quilt I hadn't seen in years. I unfolded it slowly, recognizing the uneven stitches, the familiar colors. My grandmother had made it over many winters, piecing together scraps from clothes long worn through. I carried it downstairs and draped it over the couch. It felt right there. That evening, Aunt Margaret called. She didn't ask when I was coming back to the city. Instead, she told me about a neighbor who'd just had a baby, about the way the garden was coming along, about nothing that needed solving. "Stay as long as you need," she said before hanging up. "The house knows." I believed her. As night settled, I wrapped myself in the quilt and sat with a cup of tea, watching the room grow dim. I noticed how my body leaned into the softness, how my thoughts slowed without effort. The mystery that had brought me here no longer felt like a question. It felt like a presence. I realized then that some mysteries aren't meant to be unraveled. They're meant to be lived inside of, quietly, patiently, until they become part of the background, like the sound of the sea or the creak of a familiar floorboard. When I finally went to bed, the quilt heavy and comforting over me, I felt something settle deep within my chest. Not an answer, a knowing. And it was enough to carry me gently into sleep, where nothing was required of me except rest.
The morning came with a softness that felt deliberate. I woke before the sun fully rose, the room still wrapped in a blue-gray hush. For a while, I stayed exactly where I was, noticing the gentle weight of the quilt, the steady rise and fall of my breath. My body felt rested in a way that wasn't just physical, like something deeper had finally unclenched. When I did get up, I moved quietly, almost instinctively, as if the house and I had agreed not to rush each other. I decided to bake. It wasn't planned. I simply found myself pulling ingredients from the cupboard, lining them up on the counter the way my grandmother used to. Flour dusted the air faintly as I worked, and the repetitive motions felt grounding, stirring, folding, waiting. The kitchen filled with warmth and a familiar, comforting smell that seemed to reach into the corners of the house. While the loaf baked, I opened my grandmother's letter to me. I hadn't touched it yet, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to meet it when I felt fully present. I sat at the table, the chair solid beneath me, and unfolded the paper slowly. Ella, if you're reading this, it means you came back in your own time. I hoped you would, but I never wanted to hurry you. This house doesn't need to be kept forever. It just needs to be remembered kindly. Families aren't puzzles to solve. They're stories we carry, even when we forget the words for a while. Whatever you decide, know that you belong, whether you stay or go. Love always, Grandma. I read it once, then again. The words settled without stirring anything sharp. Instead, they left a warmth behind, like a hand resting briefly on my shoulder. Later that day, the town gathered for its weekly market near the harbor. I almost didn't go, not out of reluctance, but contentment.
but something nudged me toward it. I wrapped a light sweater around myself and walked down as the sun climbed higher. There were tables with fresh bread, jars of honey, small bouquets of flowers. Voices overlapped gently, never loud. Someone played a guitar nearby, the music more felt than heard. I ran into people who remembered me not as I was, but as I am now. They asked about my life in the city, but without expectation. No one pressed for explanations. It felt like being allowed to exist without performing. Daniel met me near the edge of the crowd, 2 cups of coffee already in hand. We leaned against the railing overlooking the water, watching boats drift lazily. "You seem lighter," he said, not as an observation, but an acceptance. "I feel quieter, in a good way." He smiled, and we stood there without filling the space between us. By the time I walked back to the house, the afternoon had stretched and softened. I took the long way, noticing how my steps matched my breathing, how the warmth of the day lingered gently on my skin. Inside, I cut a slice of the bread I'd baked that morning. It was still warm. I ate it slowly at the kitchen table, savoring each bite, feeling completely present in my body. As evening approached, clouds rolled in, dimming the light. I turned on a lamp and watched the shadows settle into familiar shapes. The house felt full, not of people, but of something steadier. I realized then that this visit wasn't about deciding anything yet. It wasn't about staying or leaving, keeping or letting go. It was about remembering how to let a day unfold without resistance. That night, as rain began tapping softly against the windows, I lay in bed listening to its gentle rhythm. My thoughts drifted without attachment, like leaves on water. And somewhere between one breath and the next, sleep found me, unforced, complete, and deeply kind.
The rain lingered into the morning, not heavy enough to demand attention, just a soft, steady presence. I woke to its quiet tapping and stayed under the covers a little longer, letting the sound smooth the edges of my thoughts. Each breath felt slower than the last, as if my body had learned a new, gentler pace overnight. When I finally rose, the house felt hushed, attentive. The light was muted, filtering through clouds that hung low and patient. I made tea instead of coffee, enjoying the way the steam curled upward, unhurried. I carried my mug into the living room and sat near the window, watching rain slide down the glass in thin, wandering paths. My shoulders softened as I rested back, noticing how the chair held me without effort. There was nothing waiting for me to do. In the quiet, I became aware of something subtle, not a sound exactly, but a sense of listening, as though the house wasn't just sheltering me, but keeping me company. I opened another letter from the box. This one was addressed to my mother, written years before I was born. It spoke of choices made carefully, of hopes carried forward even when the path wasn't clear. There was tenderness in every line, and an absence of regret. I felt like I was being trusted with something intimate, not because I needed to act on it, but because I could now hold it gently. Later that morning, Aunt Margaret stopped by again. She brought soup in a pot that had seen many kitchens. We ate at the table, the rain continuing its quiet conversation with the roof. "She always thought this house helped us hear ourselves better," Aunt Margaret said, glancing around. "That when things slowed down, the important parts had room to surface." I nodded. That felt true in my body, not just my mind. After she left, I found myself rearranging small things. A photo frame shifted slightly. A stack of books moved closer to the chair by the window. Nothing dramatic, just listening to what felt right where. In the afternoon, the rain eased. The clouds thinned, allowing streaks of pale light to return. I stepped outside onto the porch and breathed in the damp air, cool and clean. The world smelled renewed. I thought about my life beyond this place, the apartment, the schedules, the gentle hum of ambition that had once felt so necessary. It all still existed. Nothing here erased it, but something had softened my relationship to it. I realized I wasn't here to make a decision. I was here to remember how to listen. As evening approached, I lit a candle on the kitchen table. The small flame flickered steadily, casting warm shadows that moved slowly across the walls. I ate dinner quietly, savoring the simple flavors, the way the house held the warmth. Before bed, I walked through each room, turning off lights. I paused in the hallway, resting my hand on the wall, feeling the solid reassurance beneath my palm. "Good night," I whispered, not to anyone in particular. In bed, I listened to the distant ocean again, its rhythm steady and familiar. My breath matched it naturally, without thought. I understood then that what remains, after questions fade, after urgency dissolves, is presence, and presence is enough. That thought carried me gently into sleep, where everything felt slow, safe, and exactly as it needed to be. The morning felt different, though nothing had changed. I noticed it the moment I woke, a quiet clarity, like the air after rain when everything looks the same but feels newly outlined. The ocean was steady, the light familiar, yet something inside me had settled into a shape it hadn't held before. I stayed in bed for a while, one hand resting over my stomach, feeling my breath rise and fall. There was no urgency in it, just a calm awareness, as if my body was gently checking in with itself. When I finally got up, I opened every window in the house. The breeze moved through slowly, carrying the soft sounds of morning, distant gulls, a car passing far away, the subtle creak of the porch steps. The house breathed with me. I made breakfast and ate standing by the counter, watching the light stretch across the floor. I realized then that I wasn't thinking about what I should do next. I was simply noticing where I was. Later, I walked into town one last time, not with finality, but with attention. I stopped at the bakery, thanked the woman behind the counter by name. I lingered in the bookstore, running my fingers along the spines without choosing anything new. Daniel walked me part of the way back. "You don't have to decide everything at once," he said gently, as if reading the quiet question beneath my thoughts. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. Back at the house, I packed slowly. Not everything, just enough. I folded clothes, paused often, letting memories surface without pulling at them. I placed my grandmother's letter carefully between the pages of the book Daniel had given me. In the hallway, I stopped by the small cabinet once more. I didn't open it this time. I didn't need to. Some things had already been placed where they belonged, not in drawers or boxes, but inside me. Before leaving, I sat on the porch steps and closed my eyes. The wood was warm beneath me. I let myself feel the weight of my body, supported, grounded. I took 3 slow breaths, each one softer than the last. The choice I was carrying wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't announce itself as a turning point. It felt more like a gentle alignment, a knowing that I could return here whenever I needed to remember myself. I stood, locked the door, and rested my palm against it for a moment. "See you soon," I whispered. As I walked down the path, the hydrangeas brushed lightly against my legs, petals cool and delicate. The house stood quietly behind me, unchanged, unbothered by distance. And as I drove away, the ocean still visible in the mirror for a while, I felt no loss, only continuity. Some places don't ask us to stay. They simply remind us that we can. That thought stayed with me, warm and steady, as the road stretched ahead and the day unfolded gently around me. The drive back felt shorter than I expected, not because the road had changed, but because something in me had. I noticed it in the way my hands rested easily on the steering wheel, in how my shoulders stayed relaxed, even as the town disappeared behind a gentle curve in the road. The ocean slipped from view eventually, but its rhythm stayed with me. I could still feel it in my breathing, steady, patient, unhurried. Every so often, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled without thinking. I looked rested, softer around the eyes, more myself. When the landscape shifted back into fields and then suburbs, I didn't resist it. I let the world expand again at its own pace. There was no sense of leaving something behind. The house, the town, the quiet, they had all folded neatly into me, like a letter kept close rather than stored away. I stopped once along the way at a small roadside cafe. I ordered something warm and sat by the window, watching clouds drift slowly overhead. The chair supported my back, the cup warmed my hands. I noticed how easily I settled into the moment, how naturally stillness came to me now. Back in the city by evening, the familiar sounds greeted me. Distant traffic, voices rising and fading, the gentle pulse of life continuing. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, but not in a bad way. Cozy, contained. I set my bag down and stood in the center of the room for a moment, letting myself arrive fully. I opened the window just a little. The air that came in didn't smell like the sea, but it carried its own quiet comfort. Night settling in, lights turning on one by one across the buildings. I turned on a lamp instead of the overhead light, letting the room soften around the edges. Before bed, I took out my grandmother's letter once more. I didn't reread it. I simply held it, feeling the familiar weight of the paper, the care in the folds. Then I placed it in a drawer beside my bed, knowing exactly where it was. As I lay down, I noticed how my body responded, sinking into the mattress, breath slowing without instruction. The day loosened its hold. Thoughts came and went gently like waves that no longer needed my attention. I realized then that the mystery I'd gone looking for had never been about the house itself. It was about remembering how to come home to myself. With that realization resting quietly in my chest, I turned onto my side and let my eyes close. The world felt kind, held, complete enough for now.
And as sleep gathered me in, slow, deep, and untroubled, I carried the light of that place with me, knowing it would be there whenever I needed to rest again.